When we talk about Russiagate and the Mueller investigation and the fraudulent Crossfire Hurricane investigation, all those kinds of things, we often talk about them in almost kind of colloquial terms. Like, obviously, Peter Strzok's text messages were absolutely appalling and they showed the bias and all these kinds of things. And what we don't talk about as much, and what we should do, and what we're going to try and do here today, is talk about actual legal standards. The fact that a lot of this stuff was just plainly illegal, not just like unethical or abuse of power or kind of a broader concept, but actually illegal. And there's a very interesting thing that we can use to sort of as a hook to show this, and that is that there's one part of the entire Russiagate kind of saga that where something was in fact declared illegal by the courts. And that, of course, is the Carter Page FISA, or multiple Carter Page FISA. So the government got these warrants against Trump campaign advisor Carter Page, and they were not only gotten under false pretenses, and not only did the government lie, and not only did Strzok do horrible things, and Comey and McCabe and everyone, but we actually have a court ruling. In fact, we have multiple court rulings saying that the whole thing was illegal. And so this then is really important, because this is something tangible. This is something we can grasp and use and run with. And by the way, huge credit here to our friend Steve McIntyre, who, initially, this goes back years. We kind of offline talking with him and so on, and he was sort of the first that I can remember who came up with this idea of, well, given that something was actually legally declared invalid, why don't we use that to go after the other things? And I think that's exactly right. So since the Carter Page FISAs were declared illegal, what consequences does that have on other aspects of Russiagate? That's kind of, I think, the overarching question that we want to look at here. And if you look at the details of those court rulings on the Carter Page FISAs, you'll find something extremely noticeable, very, very interesting. The reasons why they were declared illegal. And in fact, when you look at the specifics, every single reason given by the court, and we can go through them here in a moment, as to why those FISAs were declared illegal, applies just as much to, for instance, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, and perhaps more importantly even to the Mueller investigation. So I would argue that on the basis that the FISAs were declared illegal, the entire Mueller investigation should also be declared illegal.
Yeah, I still always think we talk about it so much, perhaps because you were integral in uncovering it, but still going back to the Danchenko interview, because I don't think you can sort of view all of these other things without this inherent understanding that the FBI knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that everything that they were putting down in writing, both before the FISA court and also, because remember, the initial FISA on Carter Page, but then they continued that in subsequent 3 other FISAs, which, as you said, at least 2 of which were declared illegal, and the court strongly indicated the other 2 were as well. I'm not sure they ever actually followed up on the other 2. Memory seems to serve that they just sort of let that go.
It's still kind of ongoing. It's unbelievable that this is actually the case. But if you go to the court docket on this matter, there's still some back and forth going on. So I haven't given up hope that, we will have kind of some final resolution from the courts, or it will just peter out. But it's sort of what they're arguing over now is whether the FBI has taken kind of remedial steps and all this kind of absolute crap, which is, it's just window dressing.
Happy speak for we spanked you on the wrist and you've made the appropriate adjustments and yada, yada, yada. But the larger point is, you could say, well, they didn't interview Igor Danchenko until January of 2017. So therefore, when they issued the first Carter Page FISA, they didn't know. Well, they knew, but okay, yeah, that's still technically correct. But that doesn't explain the subsequent later renewals that took place on the Carter Page FISA, or McCabe's attempt to open a new investigation into President Trump, or the subsequent response of the appointment of Mueller a day later on May 17th. So,
Yeah,
again, just
exactly right.
it
And
is worth noting that you've got this transpiring of very close events that I don't think are separable. They're interrelated events, but all done with the overarching knowledge that everything they were saying and doing was based on a known lie, demonstrably known.
exactly. And I think you make a really good point by sort of using Danchenko and the interview of Danchenko, which was on January 24th, 2017, as the sort of the marker. And because kind of, again, legally speaking, this is how we started off the show. Like, there is this sort of, we know the whole thing was a giant fraud, and we have 1,000 reasons for that, from text messages to whatever. But that has to be distinguished from what can be legally proven by, the standards that are demanded there. And on that point, I think you're right. The court has gone out of its way not to invalidate the earlier FISA warrants because the Danchenko interview had not yet taken place. Yeah, as you say, it's a kind of a distinction without a difference and so on. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because we have those court rulings that declared those subsequent FISA warrants illegal. And this is really, really important. And so now we get to the reasons why. And the main reason is the Danchenko interview. And the FBI concealed that from the court. They lied about it to the court. And the court recognized that. And I have to say that this has not been reported that I know, or at least not widely at all, even though these rulings date back quite a few years. This is the chief judge of the FISA court, a guy called James Boasberg. No Trump fan. This is the guy who let off Kevin Kleinsmith. Kevin Kleinsmith is the only guy who's ever convicted on the Russiagate fraud side, because he doctored a document. He fabricated a document, or he changed it, he modified it in order to make it look as if Carter Page, the Trump advisor, was not a CIA source when in fact he was. So he just turned it around 180 degrees. And that's really, really, really bad. By the way, he did a few other really bad things, this Kleinsmith character, for which he wasn't charged. And
right.
Why? Well, we got to ask John Durham that. I don't know. I mean, again, they just charged them with the smallest thing they did and kind of hope then somehow the problem goes away, the sort of the limited hangout thing.
But anyway, even the smallest thing, I mean, he literally said the opposite of what the CIA said. Sending an exonerating letter to about Carter Page, and they flip it on its head, and that becomes the linchpin of obtaining the FISA warrant.
Yeah, but I'd argue that when Kleinsmith lied about the source, this Igor Danchenko character, so he told the court that Igor Danchenko was based in Russia. He lied because he knew that Igor Danchenko was actually based in Washington, D.C., and he was working at Brookings, which would have been hugely important for the court to know. Yep. In terms of this guy having zero credibility, with Brookings, of course, being a Democrat, part of the Democrat Party, essentially.
But my point was more this, even the smaller, quote unquote, smaller thing that he lied about was still a pretty goddamn big lie. It wasn't,
no, you're absolutely right. Even the smaller thing was really, really bad. But again, so they charge him with the smaller thing, which is still very, very bad. But nonetheless, even though it was so bad, this guy Boasberg, the chief judge of the FISA court, just, slap on the wrist. He literally just gave him a slap on the wrist. Nothing happened to the guy. At
sentencing, he appeared to feel sorry for him. Poor Kevin, you've gone through so much for a minor offense. Ridiculous.
It's terrible. So coming back to our point here, this same guy, no Trump fan, the guy who let off Kleinsmith, he writes this absolutely devastating takedown of the FBI. This is the ruling on the FISA warrant. And we can put some of it up here. I mean, it's absolutely devastating in terms of the language used, that the FBI hid, concealed, lie. Well, it doesn't say lie, but just essentially he does. And as a consequence, he declared unlawful those FISA warrants. So again, coming back to our main point.
And by those FISA warrants, FISA warrant 3 and 4.
Correct, 3 and 4 in March, and then in June of
Yeah.
2017. Because again, as you explained earlier, factually it's all the same. It's all lies. The whole thing is made up. But just as a legal distinction, it's the before the Danchenko interview. The two first ones were before, and the two later ones were after. So that's the reason why only the two later ones were declared illegal. Again, this is legal stuff. It's annoying, but it is what it is. But again, it doesn't really matter. We don't have to care about the earlier two ones, because we have the court rulings on the later two ones, and that's good enough for us, because it says that the FBI lied and concealed and hid and did all those things with that information. Well, what can we do with that? Well, we can use it to go through the timeline. So what else happened after the Danchenko interview? Well, James Comey went to Congress and told them there was this Trump investigation. And he relied on things like Steele. And well, by that point, Steele had been, Danchenko had said that the whole thing was made up, or there was no credible intelligence there. So he knew that, so he lied. And of course, since then, that's all been declared illegal by the court. So
it gets even worse than that, because it was in that same time frame. Brennan was kind of smart. He went and he notified members of Congress back in August of 2017. Now, he was kind of illegal in the way he did it, individual briefings, and he gave different information to different members of Congress, but he did it back then. Comey waited until the start of March 2017 to brief the Gang of Eight, giving them a knowingly false briefing in terms of what they actually knew about the Steele dossier. To my knowledge, none of the members of Congress had even the slightest inkling of Danchenko's existence when they were briefed.
No, they didn't. And actually, we should mention another thing that happened before that, before the Comey briefing to Congress, and then we move on to Mueller. But before we do that, we should also mention the Jeff Sessions recusal. I think that's also immensely important in this context, because how did they achieve the Jeff Sessions recusal on the basis of a lie? So in other words, they told Jeff Sessions, well, there's this really terrible investigation into, or terrible thing that the Trump campaign did, that they colluded with Russia, and you have to recuse yourself because you once met the Russian ambassador, which, leaving aside.
You were in a room with Kislyak at one point in time for 2 minutes while 100 other people were also in the room with Kislyak. It was a joke.
It was a joke. And Jeff Sessions was extremely, should we say, naive to just go, oh, okay. Obviously he should have said, well, so what? Everyone in Washington, D.C. has met this guy. Secondly, he should have said, show me what you got. Show me everything. If he had done that, well, they probably would have hidden it. But if he'd done that, and if they'd given him what they had, then obviously they would have had to have given him the Danchenko interview notes, which would have revealed that the entire thing was made up. So,
by the way, that attack on Sessions was led in part by McCabe.
Yep, true. But Sessions didn't do any of those things, so we'll never know what would have happened if he had done them. Maybe they would have sidelined him some other way. But the point is that the recusal of Sessions itself was illegal, because it relied on things which were lies, but which, this is the important part, which the court in the FISA case, this guy Boasberg, has declared to be illegal. So the Sessions recusal was achieved through illegal means. The Comey's briefing to Congress was illegal, because it was based on things which not only were untrue, but which the court has declared to be untrue and unlawful.
And again, 2 briefings to Congress, a pre-briefing to Gang of Eight and the public congressional briefing towards March 17th, whatever that was.
Correct. And we have the notes, for instance, for the pre-briefing. I think that was March 8th or so. It was earlier in March of 2017. They talk about Steele. They call him Crown. Crown has come up with this and that. Of course, that in and of itself was a lie, because it had nothing to do with Crown, that guy. He was just a private, not only was he a private, a dirt digger or whatever, but it wasn't even that. He was just a fabricator. But he worked for Clinton. I mean, private is bad enough, but he worked for Clinton, right? So then we get to I think the main target, or what should be the main target here, which is the Mueller investigation itself, because the Mueller investigation was based on the predicate of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. That's what it says. So to continue the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. But the Crossfire Hurricane investigation predicate had fallen apart. It fell apart the moment they talked to Danchenko. Well, it should have fallen apart earlier, but again, we're just talking kind of legally and in terms of when they no longer had an excuse. The guy told them the thing was, well, made up, or it was just kind of just stuff that some drunken friends told him, and it meant nothing. Well, it was over at that point in time, January of 2017. So if the predicate, and by the way, so this is the main point we're trying to get across here. The predicate of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, this idea that Trump was compromised, which again, Steele was the only one who ever said that in the dossier. This idea that Carter Page, the Trump advisor, had met all these Russian officials in Moscow, which, by the way, he never ever met. And by the way, this is all invalidated by Boasberg in the FISA Court. So all these allegations leveled at Trump as part of Crossfire Hurricane, they were all invalidated by the court as part of the FISA. Because again, there's this perfect overlap. Everything they used in Crossfire Hurricane, they also used in the Carter Page FISA. In many instances, the language has just been copied and pasted. You can just see the direct sort of, oh, well, we'll just take this out of Crossfire and stick it into the FISA. So when they wrote up the FISA warrant application, they just, copied and pasted. So once Boasberg invalidated everything over here in the FISA, well, then everything on Crossfire Hurricane was also invalidated. And again, legally invalidated. And then, of course, you get to Mueller, because the specific tasking was to continue Crossfire Hurricane. Well, if there was no legal basis for Crossfire Hurricane, certainly not by May of 2017, then there was no legal basis for Mueller. And why are we having this discussion? Why is this important, and so on and so forth? I think it would be fantastic if the entire investigation, this entire Mueller witch hunt, which, by the way, there's a lot of victims who are still out there, still kind of in legal limbo and so on and so forth, even at this time in 2025. If all of that were declared illegal, I think that would just be fantastic for the history books, but also, as I said, for all these victims.
Yeah, it's also, I think it's worth noting that, when we talk about a continuation of Crossfire Hurricane, yes and no, in the sense that McCabe was actively opening up a direct investigation into President Trump, formally opened it, started it before, but formally opened it on May 16th, the day before Mueller was appointed. And that was a specifically refined investigation, whereas Crossfire Hurricane was sort of an investigation of the Trump campaign, touches with Russia, with members of the Russia campaign. The new investigation was directly into President Trump himself, basically accusing him of being an agent of Russia. So again, there's a distinction there that wasn't present in the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, and that carried over into the Mueller investigation as well.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And then, of course, they also expanded it to say that Trump obstructed. But if you look at, and we recently got this document,
but I guess that's the distinction I was trying to make, is that McCabe took it and narrowed it specifically into Trump. And the Mueller investigation subsumed McCabe's investigation, took it out of his hands, but then kind of expanded it back out again.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Because this is actually a really good point. We should probably just spend a few moments here kind of just going through that. The Crossfire Hurricane investigation did not require a special counsel, because it did not, of course it targeted Trump. We all know it targeted Trump, but it did not explicitly target Trump. So therefore, you didn't need a special counsel, because the Trump's DOJ, by the way, when they say Trump's DOJ, Trump's FBI and whatever, as far as Trump's first term is concerned, those are complete, oxymorons, because all these agencies were working against Trump. But okay, formally, Trump's DOJ cannot investigate Trump himself. Hence, you have to have a special counsel, which is why McCabe opened this. We discussed this on a previous show, why McCabe opened this investigation into Trump specifically in order to trigger the special counsel. But as you quite rightly say, that doesn't mean that the special counsel gets to do Crossfire Hurricane, because that's the broader one, which doesn't require a special counsel. But they played this trick where they kind of subsumed all of it into Mueller.
I don't know. I'll be curious to see what you think. I've sort of I'm not sure. I'm not firm on this, but I've sort of taken the viewpoint that basically Mueller, maybe Rosenstein, that they started looking at what McCabe was doing in this very short period of time in post-Comey firing, where he then opened up the investigation, tried to reach out to Steele, that there was sort of an attitude of like, holy shit, McCabe's gone off the deep end. We got to take this thing out of his hands. Doesn't mean that we're not operating against Trump, but they're also recognizing that they got to get McCabe out of the picture, that they have to kind of neutralize him in some fashion. I certainly think it's notable that McCabe opens up his investigation on May 16th in the wake of Comey's firing, and then boom, right away we've got the opening of the Mueller's appointed a special counsel the following day on May 17th, and then that takes McCabe out. He's now gone, effectively.
Yep. No, yeah, I agree. In terms of the getting some sort of court ruling that declares the entire thing invalid, it's worth going back again to, we all know what the idea was with Mueller, and we all know it was a scam and so on. But let's just focus on the legal overlap between the thing that's already been declared illegal, the FISA warrant, and the Mueller investigation. The Mueller investigation is, and we have the letter here. We have Rod Rosenstein's letter here appointing Mueller.
Just a quick moment of clarity, though. It wasn't yet declared illegal. It was declared illegal after the fact.
Correct.
The issuance of the FISA itself preceded the investigation, but the declaration of invalidation happened later.
Correct. So the FISA was declared illegal in January of 2020, the first time, and then there was some subsequent rulings to the same effect. So you're right. This would be retrospectively, but that doesn't matter. I mean, I think for the history books, it would just be, I just don't want to move on. This is not something that we should move on, where people accused, not only accused, but then investigated and then tried to take down a sitting president of the United States based on something they knew was a total lie.
It was false. We've talked about this so many times, and this is kind of the heart of why we've talked about it so many times, is the very fact we've maintained that we don't want to have Russiagate just kind of forgotten and just be allowed to be relegated to the dustbins of history because of what was really going on. As you just said, this was an attack on a U.S. presidency, the office of the U.S. president, under knowingly false circumstances. And that's not something that should be let go. We shouldn't just accept that, let's bygones be bygones, and that's an old historical event. No, this was profoundly problematic.
It truly is. And here's the language used to open Mueller. Mueller is appointed to investigate any links and or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of President Donald Trump. That's what it says. Now, that is exactly the same as you find in the Carter Page FISA warrant, because, of course, Carter Page, being an associate of the Trump campaign, an advisor, was accused of links and coordinating with the Russian government. So it was specifically, in one case, it was specifically to Page, and in the case of Mueller, it was the whole campaign. But it doesn't matter, because the language used in both is, as I said, in many instances, identical. They just copied and pasted. And of course, in the Carter Page FISA, they didn't limit that. They said Carter Page is an agent of Russia, which, by the way, that was just horrendous on its own. But then they also talked about all these other things that came straight out of the fraudulent Steele dossier, which they all stuck into the Page FISA warrant application. And all of that stuff was declared, not only kind of blanket declared illegal, and that's good, that would have been great, but Boasberg, as I said, went through all these individual points where the FBI lied about this and that, and the fact that Carter Page had never actually met these people, and the fact that Steele wasn't only, he wasn't credible, but he had actually, been contradicted, and the whole Danchenko thing, they hid that. And so Boasberg goes through these things. Again, this is January of 2020. He doesn't talk about Danchenko because it hadn't been identified then, but it talks about the fact that the FBI had concealed all this exculpatory stuff, had lied, had done all these horrible things. And Boasberg, as I said earlier, I was surprised rereading that after, some years, as to how damning the language is that Boasberg uses. And again, you have that. It's completely damning. It's from the chief judge of the FISA court. He declares the entire thing unlawful. Those warrants are unlawful. And the exact same language appears here in Mueller, in opening Mueller. Well, if one thing's unlawful, then the other thing's unlawful. And it, as I said, it might seem academic, and I think you just addressed that point as well. But it's not academic. It's making sure that history records this right. If we just leave it as it is, there will always be, 50 years from now, there'll always be like, whoa, maybe this Trump guy, and he did something with Russia. There's a lot of evidence, and there was an investigation, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of where history would lead us. That's why this Mueller thing needs to be declared unlawful for the reasons we explained.
It's interesting, as you were kind of walking through this, something that came to mind, and after I had mentioned the difference with the McCabe investigation, it sort of reminded me of CNN's reporting on the dossier versus BuzzFeed's publication of the dossier, and how Jake Tapper was visibly upset that the idea was to milk the dossier for the next however long, as opposed to dumping it out there where everybody could see it. And it just strikes me that that's kind of similar to what the Mueller investigation was trying to do. McCabe's investigation kind of went over the top and was focused solely on Trump as basically an agent of Russia. And the Mueller investigation kind of stopped that, took that over, and then broadened it out as something that could be milked, and indeed it was milked. I mean, the Mueller investigation hung out there for how long? We kept thinking we were going to get something, and it just was used as this ever-present cloud over Trump's head for how long? Kind of similar to what they'd always wanted to do, but were, because of a twist of fate, were unable to do with the Steele dossier. Again, with the knowledge that everything they were trying to hang that cloud, everything about it was fiction, and they knew it.
Yeah, and one of the sort of side effects of that that's not talked about nearly enough is that Trump handed over everything to these Mueller thugs. I think it was 3-point-something million pages of campaign materials, internal communications, emails, on and on and on. They just Trump said, we have nothing to hide, hand over everything. He's the most scrutinized person ever, I think, in history, ever. And, the fact that there was an open investigation into him personally just, again, proves that. Can you imagine a Democrat campaign being forced to hand over, like, just let's say the Kamala campaign from the past few months, just hand over 3 million emails and documents from your campaign, everything you have, all their communications with Al Franken to do the phony interview where he gets $500,000, all the sort of stunts. It doesn't matter because she lost, and so I don't really want to go down there. But can you imagine a Democrat having to hand over everything?
Just imagine what would be opened up if they did. Oh my God, mind boggles.
What would we find? It would be just incredible. And in Trump's case, they found nothing.
In terms of the Mueller investigation as well, I felt that it was also a cudgel. Trump administration started to find its footing in the second half of 2017 to some degree. But Mueller began this attack on all these different Trump associates, people that were just put through the ringer. And it was also used as a block, that everything was encompassed under the Mueller investigation. So Congress, which then began to start picking up, finding a spine, kind of led by Devin Nunes, he was really the only one, but other people began to come into that and started to do their own investigation, and they were always thwarted by the Mueller investigation, that everything fell under the auspices of that, and we can't give you this. It gave the FBI a place to hide as well. So it not only did it create a cloud, but it created a cover for the FBI for the next couple of years, this operating environment that information couldn't be made public because it was encapsulated under the guise of the Mueller investigation. So it was both an attack, but it was also a protective mechanism as well.
And just on the Devin Nunes, coincidentally, exactly at the same time that they got Mueller, they sidelined him with this phony ethics investigation, and he had to kind of just sit back for 9 months or whatever. And of course, it totally made up. There was absolutely nothing there. I mean, how much has the Overton window moved on that? I mean, if anyone tried to pull that trick now, everyone just laugh it off. Ha ha! I'm not going to step back from anything. He just made it up. But back then, Nunes sort of did the right thing. But the right thing, of course, was Democrats relied on GOP to naively always just do the right thing and then kind of get completely bamboozled in the process. Well, he stuck with it. He sat out. I don't think he should have. Obviously, in retrospect, he probably thinks he shouldn't have either. But that was just a scam. But he forged on nonetheless. And then they got their report out in 2018. Which laid out, this was the Nunes report, the Nunes memo, which laid out all these frauds. But, coming back to the topic of our show here today, there is so much information out there. There are like thousands and thousands and thousands of parts to this hoax. And each and every one of them is terrible on its own. And in some, they paint this massive picture of a massive fraud. Hoax is actually too nice a word.
Yeah.
It was a massive fraud perpetrated on the American people and perpetrated on the world because it destabilized geopolitics and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, there's no consequences. Nothing happened. And it's going to be very difficult to see any of these people locked up because, statute of limitations is 5 years. So this is all such a long time ago. You can't bring them to court anymore, and so on and so forth. So hence the idea of maybe just get the entire thing declared illegal, unlawful by a court. And then, that's not sort of the ultimate closure, but it helps the victims because they should have never been pursued in the first place. And as I said, there are still people out there who are still under indictment or still under some cloud from Mueller, which was never resolved. And I think it helps the country, and it helps, most of all, it helps for the history books because it just, then it's clear. The whole thing was illegal. The whole thing wasn't only a hoax, and we all know it was a hoax, but we actually have sort of the seal of approval from a court that it was a giant fraud and everything was illegal and it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, it's fascinating that we actually have the precedent to do that. It's a really interesting point that using the argument of the FISA rulings, that they apply equally to Mueller and that's one way. Again, I think there's other things that should be done there because we can't just move. Some of these actions were in my mind, again, we don't want to use this word too lightly, but treasonous. But nevertheless, to invalidate the entirety of that through a formal ruling, as you've said, there is a path to that and there's a precedent for that.